everyone. We're so happy to have you join us. This is the Aging and Spirituality podcast. And this is where we really talk about living your best life and finding that higher potential that's inside of you that you may not have recognized yet. So, we're happy today to introduce somebody to you that's got a really exciting message, one that really touches my heart. I'll be sharing some of my personal stories about this particular subject, but welcome, Dr. Michelle May. We're so happy to have you here. Thank you for coming. Um, Dr. May is such an interesting character. First of all, we have to say she is a self-proclaimed yogi. And as everybody who has listened to us knows, we are long-time yogis. So we're going to be asking questions about that because that's an interesting story for us. She's also a family physician, and we kind of call her a rock star in mindful eating because that's what she's going to be talking about today. And that's what she's actually written many books about and been on many media platforms talking about. It's really an amazing service, actually. I think our listeners are going to enjoy it. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there are people out there that are really suffering from this particular subject and they're going to benefit from what she has to say. So Michelle says she's also been a yo-yo dieter and struggled with body image for 25 years, which is a long time, but I bet I can beat that one. I bet I struggled with a lot longer. So I'm just, my heart is really happy that somebody has taken on this particular subject, and the way she's tackled it is really helpful for, especially for women and the way that they feel about themselves. So, okay, so let's talk about how you recognize the triggers for emotional eating and how you develop that into this 4 books, at least, more coming, and how you actually focused on, teaching women how to nourish their bodies, mind, and spirit. So that brings me to my segue of tell us your story about you being a yogi. How'd you get there? What was your training, and how did that become a calling and develop into what you're doing now?
Oh my gosh, that's just such a complicated question because, as you know, things are not linear.
Yes.
I started dieting in middle school, and I dieted all the way through medical school and into my medical practice.
Oh,
And then I began to hear similar stories from a lot of my patients. And I began to think, wait a minute. So it's not just me who's struggling with these issues. It seems to be pretty prevalent. And clearly, what we're doing isn't working. If I could get through medical school, you'd think I'd be able to stick to Weight Watchers, right? But that wasn't what was happening.
yeah.
So I stopped dieting. I decided that it was actually creating disordered eating for me. It was making me feel deprived and restricted and was actually increasing cravings, not decreasing cravings. And I really struggled a lot with loss of control eating and feeling bad about myself. And so, for many people who struggle with food and body image, it was kind of this secret little side of my life that didn't really connect with who the world saw me as.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I imagine that you and others can relate to that.
Yes, I can.
Fortunately for me, right around the same time that I started working on developing a program to help people without that restrictive dieting approach, I also began practicing yoga. And I was doing them in parallel for quite a long time before suddenly on my mat, I thought, oh, wait, these are the same thing. They are the same thing in a different application. And so passionate about both and all of it. So
Wow. So that just became a calling for you. You're like, wow, I might, I mean, it was just so natural, right? Here you are being a doctor, you personally experienced it. And then this is the beauty of yoga, all of a sudden what's born out of it is an idea that is really going to help other people. And that's the amazing part about it that I love. Because I definitely struggled with yo-yo dieting from the age of 12.
yes.
My mother telling me I was fat and putting me on my first diet. And I can remember it like it was an
Mm.
eclipse, like, okay, that was part of my life. And now my life's this. And for so many, many years, that's how I felt about myself and saw myself until I kind of got to a place where you're talking about. I remember writing about, oh, diets don't work, and trying to tell myself that, but it didn't change the view I had in my head of who I
Mhm.
was. I already had that picture, right? So it was like, I'm not worthy. I'm not this. I'm not that. I can't change this. I don't have control over this. Like that's how I felt about myself. And what's horrible is that reflects out into who you express yourself in the world. And
Mm,
it would stop me and be an obstacle in a lot of ways in my life because I couldn't fix it. Like I got to be smart enough, bright enough, strong enough to fix this. So
yeah.
what is wrong with me?
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
was more than
For
that.
me, I wasn't, it didn't affect me so much on the outside, except that I felt I was faking it. I really had this sort of inner secret, this inner shame, this inner belief that I was somehow unworthy or flawed. And, I spent a lot of time trying to hide that from the world. And that takes a lot out of you, and it prevents you from being authentic and connecting with people in a deeper way. And I think needing to move that particular obstacle out was really important. And for other people, it may not be food, it may be something else. But when we start to see what's getting in our way, that's when we really can begin to make those changes.
Isn't
Absolutely.
it body image in general? Isn't that kind of the underlying cause? I mean, I was sharing with Kathy right before the cast that I was always thin and I was put ahead in school, so I was very skinny, and people teased me for being skinny, which is the same problem.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I did everything I could to gain weight and I just didn't, but it's that whole idea, I think, isn't it, that everyone has to fit this certain norm.
Old.
That's it. There you go. That's it. We call it diet culture. Diet culture that purports this belief that, eat less, exercise more, or in your case, do this, do that. And then we will all fit into this beauty ideal, and which tends to be a thin ideal. And in fact, it really turns us into objects that are trying to transform our outward body so that it matches some cultural definition, and it doesn't really respect who we are inside, and it really overemphasizes body shape and size, and other things, skin color, sexuality, gender. I mean, there's so many
Right.
pieces of this which often overlap. For me, the issue, and really, as I tell a lot of my clients, body image is more about your own perception. It doesn't have as much to do with how you're outwardly seen. It's how you perceive yourself. And, sometimes it comes from messages, mothers and doctors, and certainly the media and social media. But ultimately, healing is about knowing on a very deep sense that, you are not your body size.
Mhm. Is body dysmorphia a term that you use, and is it what we're talking about right now?
No, that is an actual clinical condition where there's a real huge disconnect between your size and how you perceive yourself. What I'm
Okay.
talking about is more run of the mill. I'm not thin enough, I'm not tall enough, I'm not, in men's case, which, they struggle from this as well sometimes, but it's different. I'm not muscular enough. And so, do you hear all the not enoughs there?
Yes.
Right?
Hi, actually.
Yes, yes. So this is exceedingly common. This body image challenge. Now, sometimes people have body image challenges and no eating challenges. Sometimes they have eating challenges that aren't necessarily born out of body image, but I think they are often closely linked for many of us, especially those of us who started at such a young age as you and I did. It starts because we are trying to change our physical appearance to match some
That's some,
perceived. Yeah.
Weird persona, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
so you work with people, and I understand you use mindfulness. And can you share a little bit about that and how you develop that into your program?
Yes. Well, so dieting is outside in. It's eat this, not that, eat this many carbs, this many calories, this many grams, weigh yourself on a scale to measure your results. So it's all outside in. And indeed, it causes us to focus on things external to ourselves, that things that we are that really end up, I think, sucking a lot of energy and time away from us.
Right.
Whereas what I found really made a difference for me was inside out. So, for example, a simple idea here is that we're all born with the instinctive ability to detect our hunger and satiety cues. And if you
Mm.
think about young children, babies, they know when they're hungry and they let their caregivers know when they're hungry. And then when they've had enough, they stop. They pull away, they start spitting it out, throwing it on the floor. Exactly. That's exactly right. And so, they know this. We unlearn these skills oftentimes in our culture. Sometimes it's innocent enough. A parent who is concerned about not wasting food or making sure the child is well fed may force them to clean their plate or eat all their dinner to earn dessert.
Yeah.
Sometimes it happens in the course of dieting. We aren't allowed to eat when we're hungry, or we're not allowed to eat so much, or we feel guilty when we do, and that can disconnect us from our body wisdom. And then, of course, in Western culture, we're so busy, we've got a lot going on, we're distracted, and we lose touch with that connection, that connection that we have to our own intuitive knowing. And so a lot of the work that I do and the program that people use to help heal their relationship with food is about reconnecting them with their
Wisdom.
wisdom about how to take care of themselves.
Wow. That would be an amazing thing to do with mindfulness. Mindfulness, when I think about it, and Chris and I have talked about mindfulness in a zillion different ways, but it's just that ability to be present. So if you can get in that stillness, you can understand what's going on inside of you. You can reconnect with the messages that are coming from in here instead of all that nonsense that you've heard over the years. And then when you can discern between those two, you can let go of the crap and just, connect with who you are and live in that more authentic stream of ideas and what works for you.
Exactly.
And it's not just your body, like we were saying up front, is the balance of body, mind, and spirit. All of those things play into that ability to be able to listen and express who you truly are.
Yes, yes,
That's
beautifully
true.
said.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so let's talk about it from a really practical standpoint. So,
Yeah.
the name of my company is Am I Hungry?
Hungry. Yes. I
And the
love that.
reason I called it that is because that is often the first point of awareness is people notice that they want to eat.
Mm.
So if they pause and check in and ask themselves, am I actually physically hungry? It takes them down a path of checking in. What is happening in this present moment? What is happening in my body? Do I have physical sensations that I've learned are cues of my body needing fuel? If I am hungry, how hungry am I?
Yeah.
If I am hungry, what am I hungry for? How am I going to make that decision about what to eat? And how much food do I need? See, all inside out, not
Yeah.
outside
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
If I am not hungry, then why do I want to eat? Was there some environmental cue or habit cue? Was
Yeah.
there some emotional trigger? Is there something else physically going on, like thirst or fatigue? And so by doing a body, mind, heart scan, we can tune into our own internal experience and look for these physical sensations, notice our thoughts, notice our emotions, and then get clearer about why I'm wanting to eat in the first place.
Okay. So you just said a body, mind, motion scan. You're not talking about a medical scan. You're talking about being internal and then
Internal.
scanning what's going on, right? Within yourself.
Exactly, a body, mind, heart scan. So literally just doing a body scan, noticing from head to toe what's happening in my physical sensations right now.
Right.
What thoughts am I having? Like, oh, I shouldn't eat that, or oh, I better eat it now in case somebody else gets to it, or in case somebody else comes home. Noticing my
Yes.
emotions, my feelings, my heart. What am I
Yes.
experiencing? Am I stressed? Am I bored? Am I celebrating?
Mm.
Any other emotional cues that might be affecting my desire to eat or causing me to choose certain foods or certain amounts.
I gotcha. So, Chris, I'm jumping all over these questions because this is one's personal to me, but do you have one you want to jump
Yeah,
in with?
yeah. You have said that mindful eating means you never have to diet again. And so for our listeners who are struggling with yo-yo dieting, what are some of the signs of someone eating for the wrong reasons, and how does the mindful eating, what is the process that helps them?
Yeah, so many people have disordered eating or chronic yo-yo dieting or weight cycling, which can all be symptoms. The biggest challenge that we have right now is that these symptoms, these issues are so common in our culture that people see them as normal. They don't even recognize that these are a source of distress. I mean, for example, as we're recording this, we're approaching the New Year's resolution, phase. So we're going to start seeing all the advertising shift from buy this, eat that to
Go to the
start this
gym.
diet.
Go-
Mhm.
Yeah.
So we're
Yeah.
getting into the epitome of this whole yo-yo cycle. Well, that's so part of our culture that people don't even recognize that there is another way to do this that doesn't involve starting to restrict and deprive and spend a lot of money on gym memberships that you don't use or don't enjoy. And so that's the biggest piece, is to say, this doesn't feel good. I don't like what's happening. I call it the eat, repent, repeat cycle.
That's going to be one of my questions.
Yeah. And so, this is a big thing. Now, I look at this as really three stages of transformation. The first stage is learning to notice and trust our body wisdom. So, specifically, cues of hunger and satiety, recognizing when I want to eat for other reasons, not making new rules like if you're not hungry, you can't eat. That's just another form of dieting, right?
Mhm.
People who don't struggle with food sometimes eat when they're not hungry.
Sure.
They just don't feel guilty about it. They don't think, well, I've already blown it. I might as well eat the whole package and
Yes.
everything else in sight. They just feel full, and then they may not eat until they get hungry again.
Right.
So that's learning to trust your body wisdom. The second stage, and this is surprising for a lot of people, is fearless eating, which basically means that I stop making foods good and bad. I stop trying to resist and create this artificial dichotomy or struggle with food, and instead make conscious decisions about enjoyment, pleasure, nutrition, fuel, and so forth. And
Wow.
third stage is to learn to meet our needs better than food ever could when we're not hungry.
Mhm.
So that's a biggie, and for a lot of people, that's one of the areas that is most challenging.
Yes.
And to begin to identify emotions and other triggers, to begin to learn how to make the connection between what you're feeling and what you're actually needing, and then taking the steps toward meeting those needs even better than eating does.
This is segueing right into the question that won't leave my brain. So I'm going to ask it now. And that is, as a life coach, all I can hear and see while you're talking is people being dropped into their traumas and the stuff that they feel like is out of control for them, or that, they don't, without the awareness of having healing and being on the other side. How do they get there? How do you nurture that? How do you make that okay for them to go through that?
I think that's a great question. Some people need to do some deeper work before they're really ready to do this kind of work. So sometimes if people have untreated trauma, especially big T trauma or things that
Yeah.
have just piled up, they may need to see a therapist before they're ready to do coaching with you or me. But sometimes what really happens is we start this process. People come to me because they think they have an eating issue or a food issue or sometimes a weight issue. Although I don't do weight loss, that's not part of my
Oh, wow.
messaging. No, because I think it just takes us right back to the
It,
outside
um,
in thought
it
process,
runs
right?
contrary to it. Does. It does.
Right, right. So I do what I call a weight neutral or a weight inclusive approach, which means this is helpful for everybody who eats, And it's helpful no matter your body size. If you struggle with your eating, this can be really helpful for you. So people will come because they think they have an eating issue. And then over time, gradually, they begin to discover that eating is often their symptom, not their problem. And it opens the door to more mindful living. They're learning the skills,
Wow.
they're learning the tools
Mm.
as part of healing their relationship with food. And then they say to me, I just, you're not going to believe this, but all of a sudden I was in a conflict at work and I dropped into my little mindfulness practice and there I was. It's just,
Yes.
it's
Right.
just fun because people will
Right.
come because they're having pain and then discover that it's a solution. I don't even like the solution, but it helps them in many areas.
That makes my heart really happy because that's how we feel about yoga, right, Chris? Like we
Yeah.
teach yoga and meditation and stuff because we know it like envelops a lot of things in life and it can help you through so many critical points. Like this particular issue is a critical point for a lot of women.
Yeah,
It
it's
hurts.
interesting because, as I said, I was practicing yoga and developing this program at the same time. Um, I I developed a workshop that I personally taught. Then I wrote a book and a workbook, and then modified that. And then I started speaking around the country on this topic at health conferences. And people came up to me and said, "Can you teach me how to do this?"
I
And
bet.
so the next phase was to begin to teach other coaches, therapists, dietitians, etc.,
Great.
physicians, nurses, etc., wellness professionals how to offer these programs. And then I evolved that initial program into a few varieties. We have one for diabetes. I teach one at Arizona State University for young adults. And the reason I brought it up is because I was so excited when I finally had the opportunity to create mindful eating and yoga.
Mm.
And I have two amazing yoga teachers who are much better at teaching yoga than I ever was.
Uh-huh.
And they helped me develop specific classes to go along with
Wow.
the messaging of the
Awesome.
workshops.
Oh, and doesn't that sound like fun? That sounds like
Well,
fun.
yeah, because it's really about embodying what we're learning. We literally take the messages onto our mat and experience it in a felt sense, and it just deepens it in a way that, just talking about it can never.
Takes you to a deeper sense of who you really are,
Mm,
without the externals. And
yeah.
Yeah.
how did being a doctor influence what you're doing? I mean, how does that fit in?
That's a great question. I was a psychology major in my undergrad years. I had decided I was going to go to medical school before I really knew what the other options were. It just seemed like something I should do.
Mhm.
And I actually really loved practicing medicine, especially family medicine, because it's such a people field and I got to deal with a lot of different things. But I think deep down, I really probably should have become a therapist instead. And so
You are
eventually,
being a therapist.
yeah, I eventually really realized that this was my path. And so I left my medical practice a number of years ago. I've been doing this work full time for quite a long time, but I don't regret my path because what it taught me was, first of all, that, there's a lot of mind body pieces to healing that we didn't learn in medical school.
Yeah.
And so I'm able to bring a perspective that my physician colleagues don't always have.
No
I
question.
would also say that part of what I'm doing now, and part of I see sort of a next phase as I'm 61 now, as I'm starting to think about what I want to do next. I also have a real passion for educating other health and wellness professionals about why a weight-centric approach is so damaging. And
Yeah,
so it's given me the credibility to be able to carry that message into that area. So,
that's awesome.
yeah. Mm.
It's awesome how the universe backs you up when you're on the right track. I just
Right
love that.
track is there.
But it really, like, I'm also an entrepreneur, so it's got my wheels going, and I'm thinking, okay, you got these four books. What was the impetus to say, okay, I need an extra book for athletes? So, for example, I have an athletic body. I think that it works completely differently than a lot of other people's body, and especially when it comes to diet and nutrition. And that's from working with an endocrinologist and really trying to understand what I can eat, what works for me and all of those things. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, how is the mindfulness process different for an athlete, different for yoga, different for, like the way you've broken it down in the books? Why did you do it that way?
Well, we'll back up a little bit and I'll speak
I know it's a big
entrepreneur to
question.
entrepreneur for a moment
Yeah.
here. Early in the development of this process, I needed a way to describe what I did that was easy to learn and
Right.
transferable, that other people could, teach it to others. So when I was writing my first book, I developed we call it a blueprint called the mindful eating cycle, which consists of 6 decision points. And what I'm doing is bringing consciousness to the decisions that people usually make habitually when
Mhm.
they're eating and don't think
When
about.
they're
So we're trying to help.
unconscious. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that mindful eating cycle turned out to be the template for everything I teach. So
Wow.
the first program was based on the mindful eating cycle, mainly targeted to people who were struggling with yo-yo dieting and disordered eating. I was giving a speech at a dietetics conference, and a dietitian came up to me and she said, my patients with diabetes are yo-yo dieters all grown up. And so we started a conversation about how mindful eating could really help people with yo-yo dieting. And I'll send you her name after we're done here because I think she'd be great on your podcast because
Oh, great. I'd love that. Thank
she's
you.
a long, long time meditator and she works with diabetes. And so I think she'd be wonderful here. But anyway, we ended up co-writing a book and creating a program for people with diabetes. We use the same mindful eating cycle. We teach many of the same skills, but we have to tweak the messaging for somebody who has pre-diabetes or diabetes. And,
Right.
because a lot of people think my books are called Eat What You Love What You Eat. And they'll say,
Right.
I can't eat what
I,
I love. I have diabetes.
right.
And my answer to them is, you have diabetes. You better find a way of managing this that you can sustain because this
Yeah.
is not going away. So,
Yeah.
that was really the idea, was that people have there's different applications depending on where you are in your life or health conditions or how you learn, that kind of thing.
Okay, I'm being selfish. You have to give me the idea behind the athlete one because you don't have that book out yet, or I would be reading it.
Yes, thank you for that encouragement. Sometimes we get stuck, and part of my stuckness in getting that done, it's about 95% finished and has
Uh-huh.
been for a while.
Okay.
But for a long time, I didn't think of myself as an athlete. Um, and then I
Oh,
realized that actually I am probably how most athletes are athletes. So, I struggled with it a little bit. I'm not an authority on sports nutrition,
I
for example.
I
So,
know what you're
I was
saying.
getting in my own way. But what
Yeah.
I realize is that a lot of athletes struggle with food. A lot of athletes struggle with body image and eating and get trapped into actually quite restrictive approaches to managing their
Yes.
eating for their sport. And
Perfectionist
yes,
approaches,
yes. Yeah, I'm
that's the
actually
problem of
thinking,
the athlete. Yeah.
yes, it's a problem with a lot of people that I work with,
Yeah.
surprisingly. And I keep thinking that should be my next book, is something about perfectionism. I think it's the all or nothing thinking that so often we address when we're using mindfulness.
Right.
It shows up so much in people with eating issues. I'm either
Let me
being
encourage
good,
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Do it.
being good or I'm being bad, right? Yeah.
Yes, I'm encouraging you really because I see it so much. I play tennis and I'm 67, but I play, at least 3 times a week. And I see women in the field that are adopting the same male-driven, performance-oriented, beat yourself up, to prove to
Mm.
themselves that they are athletes. And I've always known because I'm a little body, but I look like Mary Lou Retton when I was a little kid, just like all muscle. And my
Yeah.
dad was a coach. So I learned physicality through him. That's all we did. We didn't have TVs, we were active every dang day. We played everything. So I don't think of myself as an athlete because I'm 4'11". It's like you're not really an athlete. Although what's the little one doing the gymnastics now? She's the best freaking athlete walking the planet, and she's smaller than us. But I think of myself as athletic. And that's true. My body is very athletic. I compare myself to a friend of mine who's the same height, but she's been 100 pounds soaking wet her whole life. She
Yeah.
doesn't have the muscles that I do,
Right.
It's a whole different, it's a whole different thing. But honestly, the mindset it messes with you because it really is that perfectionist kind of attitude.
Yeah. And, the other interesting aspect of this is that for many people I work with, and this was certainly true for myself, they use exercise as punishment for eating or as a way to
Yeah,
pay
that's true.
penance or to earn the right to eat. And that mindset is very damaging. Physical activity is wonderful for us, especially as we age. It's really, I think, a magic pill for us. But if you're using it in a punitive way, then you're missing much of the benefit and you won't sustain it. So part of the messaging here is that, find something you love to do. I'm sorry, no offense to you, tennis player, but, I've picked up pickleball and absolutely love it. I compete. Just absolutely love it. Yoga, as we talked about, and I'm fortunate I live in Phoenix. So I have hiking mountains right behind me. And so I'm very lucky. Now, I've added weight training as I've aged and want to maintain some muscle mass. That's a bit of a necessity, but it's ultimately about finding things you love to do. I often counsel my clients that if you're trying to add physical activity, the key here is to do the least amount of exercise you can, joyfully and consistently. Start with the least amount, not the most amount, because that's what our culture tells us. You got to do, 60 minutes, 5 days a week, or whatever the message is. And it's too much and people won't sustain it or even start it. So start with the least amount and then do it joyfully and consistently and see where it takes you.
That's what I always say. I tell my son all the time, it isn't fun. You're not going to keep doing it. You have to find the thing that's fun so you can incorporate it into your life.
That's right.
That's the way it is.
So can you give us an example of, say, of someone who comes to you? How do they begin the process? And, maybe you can give us an example of someone who went through the process and how they were transformed.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you asked that because I just had a coaching client today that was sharing with me sort of a bit about her journey as we were reflecting on this last year. So I've been working with her for almost a year. And I think that's an important piece of this is not a quick fix. This isn't something that you're just going to, to have a conversation with me and then do it.
Done.
Right, exactly. And in fact, because of that, one of the ways I like to work best is I love to work with people in a workshop format with others first. We have a lot of groundwork to cover. We have a lot of skills and messaging. Plus, a lot of people have so much shame about their eating that working in a group really helps them uncover that and to be able to say, oh, wow, this is a cool person and she struggles with it too. Maybe I'm not, maybe I'm not broken.
Yeah.
And so I love to teach the workshop over 8 to 12 weeks first. And then I love to then transition into group or individual coaching from there. So for example, one of the very first things we do in the very first workshop is we explore the mindful eating cycle. And I have them consider how somebody who doesn't struggle with food or eating at all behaves. And then we apply the eating cycle decisions to that situation. And then we contrast that with how we are behaving when we are in an overeating cycle, when we're using food for reasons other than our body's needs.
Right.
And then we look at how we behave in a restrictive eating cycle. In other words, when I'm dieting and shaming myself, how does the eating cycle play out? And so that introduction is often transformational. People can actually see how these patterns develop one from the other because why you're doing anything will affect every other decision. And
Yes.
that begins to open the door to relearning how to trust our body wisdom as a next step.
I love that. I sure hope you are recording these and creating an online workshop because so many more people there to hear your messaging, you know?
Thank you.
Thank-
I actually am doing that. And I love that you asked that because again, as we're recording this, it's New Year's and I'm working right now on a master class called the Anti-Resolution Plan, How to Eat with Ease.
Oh, wow.
It'll be a free class. I'm gonna, spend 90 minutes talking about the stages of transformation and how this is different from what we've done. So I hope if anybody out there is interested in just getting a little peek inside of it, that you'll join me for that. I'm super
Perfect.
excited about it.
That's perfect. That's a great idea for a lead magnet. Get the people in just so you can have this conversation. And it makes my heart really happy that you're doing community because people really do need to see each other in there and go, I'm okay. It's just, I'm not going to die from this and this is okay. And I can do this, It's really good for their hearts to connect and, know that they're not weird or abnormal. So
Alone.
I love the workshop format a lot. So what about 2024? I think you've told us a few things about what you've got upcoming. Oh, the question of the day. We can't end without asking you this question. What is your opinion of this new craze of medicines like Ozempic and the what's happening now? We need your doctor's opinion on that.
Well, I'm not a prescriber anymore. I can only give you my perspective as a, medically trained person and as a person who's worked in this field with people for 25 years now.
Right.
And what I would say about this is that I think it's too soon to know because in fact, over the 25 years that I've been doing this work, plus my 61 years prior in total of being on this planet, what I know is we've been through many, many crazes, many, many fads, many, many solutions, and this is it kind of thing that have not panned out or have ended up actually creating problems. So I'm afraid it's a little too soon to know for sure how this is going to be. What I would say is it really puts an exclamation point on how weight focused our culture is. I mean, people are just jumping all over this, despite the expense, despite what we don't know, despite the fact that everybody is being very clear that when you go off of it, any weight you lost will come back. And so people are somehow willing to commit themselves to something for the rest of their lives. And it just shows you how I don't know, how weight centric our culture is. Let's look at ourselves as body, mind, heart, and spirit. I have a number of clients who are taking it, most of them for diabetes, but I don't have a problem working with somebody on it, but I certainly think that you're not going to find a solution in taking a shot once a week. Ultimately, we have got to get to the underlying decisions that we make around eating. And that is ultimately the most important thing.
Yes, and how you feel about yourself. You know, working with the person, whether they're making those emotional mental transitions into a person that's balanced, whole, and feels good about life, is full of joy, is doing what they want to do, that kind of thing. You can see that on somebody.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure your program is helping a lot of women on the planet to do that. So bless your heart for doing it. It's great work, great
Oh, I'm
service.
very lucky to be able to do it. It's funny how sometimes the things that you struggled with the most turn out to be a gift.
How you
Yep. Turn out to be the calling.
That's right.
That's the truth. Right. That's the truth. Well, thank you for being here. Really, from our hearts.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sure our listeners are getting a lot out of this.
Yes,
I
can't
hope so.
wait to post this one, and I hope they come screaming to your programs online.
Well, let me share. My website is amihungry.com. There's loads of free things you can get there, articles, blog posts, download the first chapter of Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat, so you can see the mindful eating cycle for yourself. And then if you're interested in attending our masterclass in early January, the URL is amihungry.com/anti-resolution plan, all one word.
When does that start in January?
I'm going to do it the first 2 weekends in January. It's 90 minutes.
Right after the holidays. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. When people are ready.
All right. Well, listeners, I hope you enjoyed that. I'm all excited. I hope you get something out of that. I hope you follow up with Michelle in her program. If you have any questions, just let us know. Thank
And
you
we'll
again
put
for
those
coming.
links in the show notes too. So
Definitely. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.